I'm Claire Madison, and I'm 28 years old. For 4 years, I gave up everything to care for my grandmother, my career, my social life, even my boyfriend. I did it because family was everything to me. But my parents, Mark and Linda, saw it as a job. When my grandmother passed, they got her $65 million, and with a cruel sneer, they threw me out of the house on Christmas night. I thought I had lost everything, but they had no idea what was coming next. The moment their lawyer laughed, their faces went pale because they never bothered to read the entire will. How can karma be so satisfying? Let me take you back to where it began. My parents, Mark and Linda, were another story. For as long as I could remember, they had this dream of a big life, the kind you see in magazines, all sunshine and fancy cars. They were always a bit restless, chasing the next big thing, the next get-rich-quick scheme. They were lovely people in their own way, but they lived in this permanent state of wanting more. I'd watch them buy things on credit they couldn't afford, justifying it all as a temporary struggle. My childhood was a whirlwind of new ideas, new jobs that never lasted, and a whole lot of moving from one rented house to the next. For years, they had been living in Miami, Florida, a place they insisted was a major upgrade for their social status. The truth was, they were barely scraping by. My dad, Mark, worked as a driver for a private car service, and my mom, Linda, was always trying to start some new business, selling everything from homemade jewelry to pyramid scheme wellness products. They called me often not to check in on me, but to ask for money. A couple hundred here, 1,000 there, always, with a promise to pay me back when their next big idea took off. It never did, and I never saw the money again. My parents' endless pursuit of luxury was a stark contrast to my Grandma Eleanor's quiet life. Grandma Eleanor, who had always been my rock, lived in a small, comfortable house just outside Charlotte. Her house was filled with the smell of baked bread and old books, and it was a place where I always felt safe. She was a beacon of common sense and a quiet pillar of strength. She had worked her whole life as a school teacher and had saved diligently. She believed in hard work and self-reliance, values my parents seemed to have no use for. In the spring of 2020, Grandma Eleanor's health began to decline. It was a slow, heartbreaking slide. My parents, Mark and Linda, called me with the news. My mother's voice on the phone was a masterclass in performative grief. She said they would love to fly up and help, but their business was just taking off, and they simply couldn't leave. I knew they were lying. They were just looking for an excuse to not take on the responsibility. So without a second thought, I quit my job. It wasn't a hard decision to make. My grandma had done so much for me and she needed me. I knew my 5-year plan was going to be delayed, but caring for her was more important. I moved into her spare room, and for the next 4 years, my world revolved around her. I spent my days cooking, cleaning, and just being there for her, a silent presence in her fading world. There were moments of clarity where she would smile and hold my hand and tell me how proud she was of me. Those were the moments that kept me going. My parents would call maybe once a month. They'd ask how she was doing, then quickly pivot to their latest financial woes. They'd complain about the rising cost of living in Miami, the terrible real estate market, and how they just couldn't catch a break. They never once offered to come help or to send money for her care. Their selfishness was so blatant it was almost laughable. I would sometimes just listen to them, my phone pressed to my ear, a bitter taste in my mouth, wondering if they knew the true meaning of family at all. I was in my own world, a world of medicine schedules, doctor's appointments, and comforting words whispered in a quiet room. I was so consumed with caring for my grandma that I barely noticed the world outside. The friends I was losing touch with, the career I had put on hold. My boyfriend at the time, Michael, grew distant. He couldn't understand why I had to give up so much. He told me I was making a mistake, that my parents would never appreciate my sacrifice. He just didn't get it, and a few months later we broke up. I was alone, but I had my grandma. And for me, that was enough. The winter of 2024 arrived with a quiet solemnity. Grandma Eleanor had been steadily declining, and I had been living in a state of constant low-grade dread. The end felt close, a silent shadow creeping into the corners of our home. I was in the kitchen one evening chopping vegetables for a simple soup when my phone rang. The screen flashed my father's name, Mark. My heart sank. He rarely called unless he wanted something or had news, and given the state of things, I knew it wasn't going to be about his new real estate venture. I answered with a sigh. "Claire," he said, his voice unusually somber. "I'm so sorry to have to tell you this over the phone. I didn't need to hear the rest." The words got stuck in my throat, a knot of grief so tight I could barely breathe. I dropped the knife, the clatter echoing in the quiet room. "Dad, what is it, your grandmother?" he began, and I could hear the forced quaver in his voice, the practiced sadness. "She's gone, honey. She passed away in her sleep." A deep, bone-jarring cold washed over me. I sank to the floor, my hands shaking. I didn't cry. It was beyond tears. It was a complete and total silence inside me, a void where my rock used to be. The last 4 years of my life, the love, the sacrifice, the long nights of worry, all of it came crashing down in that one sentence. My father continued speaking his words, a blurry soundtrack to my despair. He was saying something about them flying up as soon as they could, about handling everything. It was all a performance, and even through my grief I could hear it. I simply said okay and hung up. The next few days were a blur of arrangements, of phone calls to funeral homes and florists, of numbly picking out a casket. My parents flew in and their grief felt so foreign to me. They wore black, they had tissues ready, and they offered condolences to neighbors with practiced ease. But their eyes told a different story. There was a lightness to them, a barely concealed relief that this chapter was finally closed. I could see it in the way my mother Linda smiled just a little too brightly when no one was looking, and in the way my dad's shoulders had visibly relaxed. They acted like they were attending a business conference, not a funeral for their own mother. The day of the funeral was cold and gray. The wind bit at my exposed skin as we stood by the grave. My parents looked every bit the grieving children, their faces, a study in solemnity. But their whispers were not about mourning. They were talking about the will, about the lawyer, a Mr. Davies, who was waiting for us at the bank after the ceremony. I felt a pang of disgust. Grandma Eleanor had just been laid to rest, and all they could think about was the money. After the burial, we drove to the bank. Mr. Davies was a kind-looking man with a silver head of hair and a gentle smile. He invited us into his office, and the air was thick with a tension that had nothing to do with grief. My parents sat with their backs straight, their hands folded neatly on their laps like two vultures waiting for a feast. I sat a bit slumped, my heart still aching with the finality of it all. Mr. Davies cleared his throat and began to read from the official document. He spoke of Grandma Eleanor's love for her family and her generosity. He explained that she had always valued hard work and selflessness. My parents exchanged a smug glance, and then he said the words that made my world tilt on its axis. He announced that my grandmother had bequeathed her entire fortune, a staggering $65 million, to my parents Mark and Linda. My mother gasped, a sound of pure, unadulterated shock and delight. My father's face broke into a wide, triumphant smile. Mr. Davies continued explaining that Grandma Eleanor had chosen this path because she believed my parents, as her only children, would honor her legacy. He then looked directly at me. He explained that she had written that she trusted my parents to take care of me as I had taken care of her. My parents' smiles were now plastered across their faces. They looked at me as if to say, "See, we are good people." She knew it. I just sat there, my mind reeling. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was just numb. They got it all. The money, the validation. It was all theirs. The weeks that followed Grandma Eleanor's funeral were a blur of activity but not of grief. My parents, Mark and Linda, returned to Charlotte and promptly put Grandma's small, comfortable house on the market. They said they were going to find a new place for us, a place that was more fitting for their new status. They hired movers to pack up everything, but they were careless. The books I used to read to my grandma were tossed into boxes without a thought. Her beloved antique furniture was treated like junk. I watched it all with a detached curiosity, as if I were a stranger in my own home. My parents were consumed by their new wealth like children with a shiny new toy. They bought a new house, a monstrous mansion in a gated community, one of those places with a perfectly manicured lawn and a security guard at the gate. My mother called it their trophy home. They insisted I move in with them, telling me that this was the beginning of our new life together. I went along with it, hoping to find some semblance of the family I had lost, hoping this new wealth would somehow bring us closer, but it only seemed to create a bigger chasm. They spent money without a second thought. My dad, Mark, bought a brand new sports car, one of those flashy red ones that screeches when you hit the gas. My mother, Linda, filled the house with expensive art and designer furniture, telling me that every piece has a story. But I knew the real story was that it was all bought with my grandma's hard-earned money. They even hired a personal chef and a housekeeper. My parents had never lifted a finger to clean or cook in their lives, and now they were living like royalty. Christmas Eve arrived with a cold snap and the promise of snow. My parents were hosting a big party, their first big event, as the new rich Bennetts. I watched as people started to arrive. Relatives I hadn't seen since I was a child. Old family friends who never once called me to ask how my grandma was doing. They all came dressed in their finest, carrying expensive bottles of wine and wrapped gifts. They flocked around my parents, their faces a mixture of awe and envy. They all had the same questions. How did you do it? How did you get so lucky? I felt like a ghost in the crowded room. I tried to talk to a few cousins, but they were too busy marveling at the new chandelier. I tried to talk to my mother, who was holding court by the fireplace, her face lit up with a triumphant glow. I said, "Mom, can I talk to you for a second?" She just waved her hand dismissively and said, "Not now, Claire, I'm busy." My father was no different, laughing loudly at a story. An old friend was telling him about his new car. I realized then that I wasn't their daughter in that moment. I was just a background prop, a quiet reminder of the life they had left behind. Later that night, after most of the guests had left, I found my mother in the kitchen pouring herself a glass of champagne. I decided to try one more time. "Mom," I said, "I just wanted to say thank you for everything." She turned to me, her smile gone, replaced by a cold, hard stare. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For doing your job." I stood there confused. "My job?" I asked. "Yes, your job," she said. "You took care of your grandmother, and now we're reaping the rewards. You've done your part. You are no longer needed." I felt my heart shatter. It was worse than being ignored. It was being told that my years of sacrifice were nothing more than a transaction. "But Mom, I'm your daughter," I said, my voice trembling. "Oh, Claire," she said, her voice dripping with a condescending sweetness. "That's why we kept you around for so long. But now that we have money, we don't need you. You are a reminder of the life we used to have." She turned to my father, who was standing in the doorway, and said, "Mark, tell her." He just stood there, silent, his face blank. My mother's eyes narrowed. "You're useless now," she said. "You're just a drain on our resources. We have a life to live, a big, new, exciting life, and you don't fit into it." Before I could even protest, she grabbed my arm and dragged me to the front door. My father, with a strange, passive efficiency, started grabbing my few bags and boxes from the hallway closet and throwing them out onto the cold, snowy lawn. "Go," my mother said. "Go find your own life." I stood there in the freezing night, wearing just a thin sweater. I watched as my mother slammed the door shut, the sound of laughter and festive music still audible from inside. I was alone outside my own home on Christmas. The front door slammed shut with a sound that seemed to echo inside my chest. It was a final, terrible punctuation mark on a sentence I never saw coming. The cold air bit at my skin, and I shivered, not just from the temperature, but from the shock of it all. I was standing in the middle of a perfectly manicured lawn, my meager belongings scattered around me like trash. The warm glow of the Christmas lights inside the house seemed to mock me, a cruel reminder of the warmth and family I had just been thrown out of. I could still hear the muffled laughter and the faint strains of a holiday song. It felt like I was watching a movie of my own life, only I had just been cut from the scene. I picked up the small duffel bag that held what little I owned and slung it over my shoulder. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a car. My parents had sold my old sedan when I moved in with my grandmother, promising to buy me a new one when the time was right. It was just another one of their empty promises. I walked down the driveway, the gravel crunching under my worn boots, and out onto the quiet street. The neighbors' houses were all lit up with festive lights, their windows promising cozy, loving scenes inside. I felt so alone, more alone than I had ever felt in my entire life. I walked for hours, just wandering through the cold night. The snow began to fall, tiny white flakes swirling down from the sky. It landed on my eyelashes and melted on my cheeks. I kept replaying my mother's words in my head. "You're useless now. Just a drain on our resources." I felt my heart ache with a pain so profound it almost took my breath away. All those years I had given up for them. I left my job. I lost my boyfriend. I put my dreams on hold. And for what? For a moment of clarity so brutal it almost killed me. They didn't see my sacrifice as a gift. They saw it as an obligation that had finally been fulfilled. The city of Charlotte, which had always felt like home now, felt like a cold, unfamiliar place. I walked past a diner, its windows steamy and warm, and watched as a family laughed over hot coffee and pancakes. I felt a lump form in my throat, a physical manifestation of my loneliness. I just kept walking, my feet numb, my mind a blank slate of despair. I couldn't go back to my old apartment. I had given it up when I moved in with my grandmother. I had no one to call. My old friends from my marketing job had grown distant. My phone was dead anyway. It was almost dawn when I finally made it to my friend Jennifer's apartment. Jennifer was my best friend from college. We had always been close, but our friendship had also taken a back seat to my responsibilities. I stood outside her building, a cold, broken mess, and rang the doorbell. I felt a wave of shame wash over me. I hadn't called her in months. I had no right to show up on her doorstep like this. A few seconds later, the door buzzed, and I walked inside. I took the elevator up to her floor, and when she opened her door, she just stood there, her eyes wide with shock. Her hair was messy, and she was wearing a big, comfortable-looking sweatshirt. "Claire," she said, her voice filled with concern. I just stood there, my clothes covered in snow, my eyes full of tears. I didn't say a word. I just walked past her and collapsed on her couch. It was then that I finally broke down. I sobbed, a deep, guttural sound that came from the very depths of my soul. It was a cry for my grandmother, for my lost life, and for the family that had betrayed me. Jennifer just sat there with me, a comforting hand on my back, a silent presence in the room. She didn't ask questions. She just let me cry, the kind of cry that washes away all the pain and leaves you empty and raw. When I was finally done, she brought me a warm blanket and a hot cup of tea. We sat in silence for a while, and then she said, "What happened, Claire?" I began to tell her everything. I told her about the diabolical new life my parents were living, about how my mother had called me useless, about how they had thrown me out onto the street. I told her about the money, the $65 million my grandmother had left them. Jennifer just sat there, listening intently, her face a mask of shock and disbelief. She couldn't believe my parents could be so cruel. No one could. When I was finished, she just shook her head and said, "I'm so sorry, Claire. This is unbelievable." She promised me I could stay with her for as long as I needed. It was the first act of unconditional kindness I had received in a long time. It felt like a small, comforting balm on a deep and festering wound. For the first time since my parents had thrown me out, I felt a glimmer of hope. That first night on Jennifer's couch, I didn't sleep at all. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of the past 4 years of the life that had just been erased. My parents had told me I was useless, but I knew in my heart that it wasn't true. I had given up everything to care for my grandmother, and I had done it with a pure heart. The glimmer of hope I felt was that I had a roof over my head and a friend who was willing to stand by me. That was a lot more than I had just a few hours before. The next morning, Jennifer and I sat down with a pot of coffee and a laptop. "We need to get you an attorney," she said. Her voice was firm, and it was exactly what I needed to hear. We spent the morning looking up lawyers in Charlotte, specifically those who specialized in estate law. It was a difficult search. The city was a small town in a lot of ways, and a lawyer who was good at what they did was a known quantity. We found a few names and Jennifer started making calls. The first call was to a Mr. Evans, a slick, fast-talking man with a reputation for winning. He listened to my story, his voice a steady stream of "uh-hus" and "I see." I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. When I was finished, he said, "It sounds like a difficult case, Claire. Your parents have a legal will, and they have the money to hire the best. You're going to need a lot of resources to fight this, and even then there's no guarantee of a win." I felt a knot form in my stomach. He was right. I had no money. I had no job. I had nothing to offer an expensive lawyer. He told me he couldn't take my case on unless I could come up with a retainer of at least $20,000. The next few calls were no better. One lawyer laughed at me, telling me that family drama was not a legal issue. Another told me that unless I had proof of foul play or a second will, I had no case. I felt my small glimmer of hope beginning to flicker and die. Every time a lawyer said no, a little piece of me broke. It was a cruel reminder of how little control I had over my own life. I was at the mercy of my parents and their seemingly endless fortune. The days blurred into a week. I spent my time sending out resumes, but with a 4-year gap in my work history, no one was calling me back. I tried to stay positive, but it was hard. My parents, meanwhile, were on a shopping spree. My father, Mark, bought a new yacht, a massive thing with a polished deck and a name painted on the side in gold letters, The Fortune. My mother, Linda, was posting pictures on her social media pictures of a new $3 million mansion in Miami, pictures of herself in designer clothes. It was a public display of their new wealth, a constant reminder of what I had lost. One day, I was at a coffee shop and a woman I used to work with came up to me. Her name was Sarah. She was kind and gentle, and she asked me what I was doing. I told her the whole story. She listened with an open heart, and when I was finished, she just sat there in silence for a while. "I don't know what to say, Claire," she finally said. "It's just so awful." I agreed. It was awful. I went home to Jennifer's apartment that night feeling defeated. I had been knocked down so many times that I was starting to believe I was a punching bag. I felt a wave of despair wash over me, a feeling that I was trapped in this nightmare. I had lost my grandmother, my parents, my home, and now it seemed my future. I lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders. I wanted to give up. I wanted to just curl up and disappear. But a small part of me, a small voice inside, refused. I knew I couldn't give up. Not yet. I had to keep fighting. For my grandmother. For myself. The question was, what was there left to fight for? I had hit rock bottom. I just didn't know how to climb back up. The next morning I woke up on Jennifer's couch, feeling a heaviness I couldn't shake. The coffee she made for me tasted like a bitter defeat, and the sun shining through the window seemed to mock my despair. My whole world had crumbled into dust, and I had no idea how to start building it back up. I spent the day trying to distract myself. I cleaned Jennifer's kitchen, folded her laundry, anything to keep my mind from replaying the brutal final scene with my parents. It was no use. The words "you're useless now" were burned into my brain. A constant cruel whisper that followed me wherever I went. Jennifer, bless her heart, tried to cheer me up. She took me to a cafe for lunch, but I barely touched my food. She suggested we go to a movie, but I just couldn't. I felt like a zombie just going through the motions. I was so exhausted emotionally and physically that all I wanted to do was curl up in a ball and disappear. I was tired of fighting, tired of hoping, and tired of pretending that everything was going to be okay. That evening, I was sitting on the couch staring at my phone. It was completely silent. No new emails from prospective employers, no texts from old friends, just the blank, unforgiving screen. I was about to turn it off when an unknown number flashed on the screen. I almost didn't answer. It could have been anyone, a telemarketer, a wrong number. But something, a strange, unexplainable instinct made me slide my finger across the screen and say hello. "Claire Madison," a man's voice asked. It was a familiar voice, but I couldn't place it. It was deep and gentle with a hint of a southern drawl. I felt my heart skip a beat. "Yes, this is she," I said. There was a long pause, so long that I thought the call had dropped. And then the voice said, "This is Mr. Davies. I am your grandmother's attorney." My stomach dropped. Why was he calling me? My parents had already dealt with the will. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. "Was this some cruel joke, Mr. Davies?" I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Is everything okay?" I expected him to tell me something about a piece of paperwork my parents needed signed. I expected him to be professional, brisk, and to the point. But he wasn't. He hesitated, and then he said, "Claire, I'm calling you because I need to ask you something. I need you to be honest with me. Did your parents, Mark and Linda, throw you out of your grandmother's house?" My blood ran cold. How did he know? No one knew. I hadn't told anyone but Jennifer. I started to stammer to find the right words to lie, but he cut me off. "Please, Claire, I need to know the truth." "Did they?" I took a deep breath. "Yes," I said, "they did. On Christmas night." Another long pause. I could hear the sound of his pen tapping on a desk. "I see," he said. The way he said it, it wasn't a question. It was a confirmation. "And did they read the will in its entirety?" My heart started to race. My mind was going a mile a minute. "What was he getting at?" "I don't know," I said. "They had a copy. My dad said they had already gone through it." Mr. Davies chuckled, a sound that was so out of place in our somber conversation that it made me jump. "I have reason to believe they did not," he said. "I have reason to believe they only saw the digital copy. They never read the handwritten editions." The words hung in the air, a silent, powerful promise of a secret I never knew existed. I felt a jolt of pure adrenaline shoot through my veins. It was like a splash of cold water in the face, a sudden shocking realization that everything I thought was true might not be. "Handwritten editions," I said. My voice was no longer a whisper. It was a roar. "What are you talking about?" He just told me he couldn't say any more over the phone. He said it was a private matter. He said he needed to meet with me in person. He said he had something to show me, something that could change everything. He told me to meet him the next day at his office in downtown Charlotte. And with that, he hung up the phone. I just stood there, my hand shaking, a crazy, ridiculous, insane glimmer of hope burning inside me once more. That night I barely slept. The hope I felt was a strange, nervous energy coursing through my veins. It was a terrifying feeling. I had been in a state of quiet despair for so long that this sudden burst of adrenaline felt almost unnatural. I kept replaying Mr. Davies' words in my head. Handwritten editions. What could that possibly mean? I was too afraid to let myself believe it was real. Too afraid that this was just a trick of fate. Another cruel joke. But there was a part of me, a small, stubborn part, that refused to let go. The next morning I told Jennifer about the call. Her eyes widened and she gasped. "A secret will," she said. Her voice was full of a giddy excitement I hadn't felt in years. "This is a movie, Claire. This is exactly what happens in the movies." I tried to temper her enthusiasm. "It could be nothing, Jen. He just said handwritten editions. It could be a list of books he wanted to be donated to the library." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. We drove downtown to Mr. Davies' office building. It was a modern, imposing glass and steel structure. I felt so out of place in my worn jeans and old sweater, surrounded by men and women in suits who looked like they owned the world. We took the elevator up to his office on the 30th floor, and when the doors opened, I saw him standing there, his silver hair catching the morning light. He smiled at me, a genuine, kind smile that put me at ease. He invited us into his office. It was a calm, quiet room filled with bookshelves and a big mahogany desk. He offered us coffee, and as we sat down, he looked at me with a serious expression. "Claire," he said, "I have been practicing law for a long time, and I have seen many families fall apart over money. But your grandmother, Eleanor, was a wise woman. She was a woman who saw into people's hearts, and she saw the truth. She saw her daughter and her son-in-law for who they were." My heart pounded against my ribs. He was confirming what I had known all along. He stood up and walked to a large safe in the corner of his office. He began to turn a series of numbers, his face a mask of concentration. I watched him, my heart in my throat. He finally pulled out a small, worn-looking box. He opened it and carefully pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a page from a notebook, and the paper was old and yellowed. The handwriting on it was a familiar scrawl. It was my grandmother's. My hands started to shake. I felt like I was holding a piece of her wisdom and her love. "This is what I was talking about on the phone," Mr. Davies said. "This is a handwritten addendum to her will. She gave it to me about 6 months before she passed. She made me promise to keep it a secret. She told me to only open it if she were to pass, and only if she had reason to believe that her family had not been kind to you." He then began to read from the paper. The words were my grandmother's, but the message was a complete surprise. She had written that she knew that her son and daughter-in-law were greedy and that they would likely not take care of me. She said that she knew that my parents would see me as a burden and that they would try to cut me out of their lives as soon as they had her money. It was eerie how well she knew them. It was as if she had looked into the future. Then he read the final clause. "Mark and Linda must ensure Claire has a stable place to live, include her in major family financial decisions, and assist her in securing employment within 1 year of my passing. If they do not fulfill these conditions, 85% of my estate will be placed in a trust for Claire to manage." I just sat there completely stunned. My grandmother, my sweet, gentle grandmother, had orchestrated this entire thing. She had seen their greed coming a mile away. She had seen their selfishness and their lack of character, and she had done something about it. I looked at Jennifer, and her eyes were wide with shock. Mr. Davies just sat there watching my reaction, a small, knowing smile on his face. "She told me that she hoped they would not be so foolish as to throw you out," he said. "She hoped that they would honor her memory, but if they didn't, she wanted to make sure that you were taken care of." I felt a tear roll down my cheek. It was a tear of sadness for a woman I loved so much, but also a tear of joy. She had not only taken care of me, she had trusted me. She had trusted me to handle this. My grandmother, even in death, had come to my rescue. That was the moment everything changed. The moment I realized my grandmother, even in death, had been looking out for me. The small, worn piece of paper Mr. Davies held in his hand was more powerful than my parents' entire fortune. It was a testament to her love, her wisdom, and her understanding of human nature. Jennifer, who had been sitting beside me in stunned silence, finally found her voice. "Claire, you have to do something," she said. "You have to get that will." Mr. Davies just smiled. He explained that a copy of the handwritten will was in the safe along with the original. "She knew that it would be a legal battle," he said. "She knew that your parents would fight this. So she made sure that every word was legally binding and that there was a witness to her signature." My heart felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. My grandmother had thought of everything. We left Mr. Davies's office and drove to my grandmother's house. I felt a knot of dread in my stomach. The house was now owned by my parents, and I knew that going there was a risk. But Mr. Davies insisted that we needed to get the original handwritten will. He said that while the copy was legally sound, the original would be a powerful piece of evidence in court. We pulled up to the house, and I saw my father's new sports car parked in the driveway. A massive, flashy thing that seemed to mock the quiet, simple home it was parked in front of. We walked up to the front door, and I felt a wave of anxiety. What if they were home? What if they saw us? We tried the door, and to my surprise, it was unlocked. We walked inside, and my heart sank. The house was no longer my grandmother's home. It was a showroom. The old worn furniture was gone, replaced by modern minimalist pieces. The walls, which had been covered in family photos, were now bare. It was as if my parents had erased every trace of my grandmother. My stomach churned. It was more painful than seeing them live in luxury. This was a desecration. We went straight to the bedroom, my grandmother's room. It too had been gutted. My parents had already started to move things out, leaving a few empty boxes on the floor. I walked to the old dresser, the one that had been in her family for generations. My grandmother had always kept a small black notebook in the top drawer. I opened the drawer, my hands shaking. The notebook was still there. I opened it to the very last page, and there it was. The will. The handwritten additions. The signatures. I closed the notebook and held it to my chest, a powerful sense of relief washing over me. Suddenly I heard a car pull up in the driveway. It was my parents. Their laughter echoed through the quiet house, a loud, vulgar sound that felt completely out of place. I quickly hid the notebook in my bag. I could hear my mother, Linda, talking about how they were going to turn the house into a vacation rental, a source of passive income. I felt a wave of rage so powerful it almost knocked me over. I was about to walk out and confront them when my dad, Mark, walked into the room. He stopped dead in his tracks when he saw me. His face, which had been flushed with excitement, went pale. "Claire," he stammered, "what are you doing here?" My mother, Linda, walked into the room and her eyes went wide with shock. "What is going on?" she said. "Why is she here?" I just stood there, a small knowing smile on my face. "I'm just getting a few things I left behind," I said. They both looked at me with a mixture of suspicion and fear. They knew something was wrong. They just didn't know what. "You don't need to worry about me anymore," I said. My voice was calm and steady, completely devoid of the hurt I had felt just a few weeks ago. They just stood there silent, watching me. I walked past them, the small black notebook, a heavy weight in my bag, a weight that felt like the beginning of a new chapter. We left the house in a hurry, my heart pounding in my chest. The confrontation had been brief, but the look on my parents' faces was a potent mix of suspicion and fear. They had no idea what was happening, and that ignorance was the most powerful weapon I had. As Jennifer and I drove away, a sense of quiet triumph settled over me. This wasn't about the money anymore. It was about justice. It was about proving to myself, to my parents, and to the world that what they had done was wrong. The next day, Mr. Davies filed a formal lawsuit. The legal documents arrived at my parents' new mansion in Miami a few days later, and I could only imagine the shock and disbelief on their faces. Their response was immediate and aggressive. They hired a team of high-powered attorneys from one of the biggest law firms in Florida. The lawyers' first move was to try and discredit me. They claimed that the handwritten will was a forgery, and that I had coerced my grandmother into writing it. They told the media in a carefully worded press release that I was a bitter, disgruntled family member who was trying to steal my parents' rightful inheritance. I felt a pang of old pain, but this time it was a brief one. I knew the truth, and I knew I had a powerful ally in Mr. Davies. The trial began in a small, quiet courtroom in Charlotte. The room was sterile and cold, filled with the tension of a family at war. My parents, dressed in expensive designer clothes, sat on one side of the room. They looked confident, arrogant, as if this were just a minor inconvenience, a simple business transaction that would soon be over. I sat on the other side beside Mr. Davies, feeling a strange calm. This was my moment to tell my story, to finally be heard. My parents' lawyers went first. They painted a picture of me as a manipulative, greedy granddaughter who had taken advantage of my poor, frail grandmother. They tried to poke holes in my story to make me out to be a liar. I watched as they twisted my words, as they took my love and devotion and turned it into a cold, calculated transaction. They called my parents to the stand, and they both lied with a straight face, their voices dripping with a feigned sadness. My father, Mark, said that he had always loved me and that I was like a daughter to him. It was a cruel joke, and then it was our turn. Mr. Davies stood up and walked to the front of the courtroom. He was calm and methodical, a stark contrast to the aggressive lawyers on the other side of the room. He began his argument by telling the story of my grandmother, a story of her wisdom, her kindness, and her foresight. He then held up the handwritten will, the small black notebook my grandmother had kept in her dresser drawer. He explained that my grandmother had been in perfect mental health when she wrote it, and that she had signed it in the presence of a witness, a notarized witness. He then called a certified handwriting expert to the stand, a woman who confirmed that the handwriting was without a doubt my grandmother's. I saw my father, Mark, shift uncomfortably in his seat, the first crack in their armor. But the real blow came next. Mr. Davies presented his final pieces of evidence. He presented the audio recording I had secretly made on my phone, the one of my mother saying, "You're useless now." He played a series of text messages from my parents to their friends' texts, where they complained about me, mocked me, and celebrated the fact that they had kicked me out on Christmas. He even showed a video my mother had posted on her social media, a video of her laughing, sipping champagne, as my belongings were being thrown out onto the snow-covered lawn. The air in the courtroom felt thick with a quiet shame. My parents' faces went from pale to ashen. The looks they had given me throughout the trial, looks of smug superiority, were replaced by looks of pure, unadulterated fear. They realized they had been caught. They had been caught not only in a legal lie, but in a lie to themselves. The trial came to a close quickly. The evidence was simply too overwhelming. The judge ruled in my favor. Not only was the will legally binding, but he also ordered a full investigation into my parents' actions. He said that what they had done was a clear case of fraud and that they would be held accountable. I just sat there, my mind reeling. I had won. I had not only won the money, I had won back my self-worth. I had won back my life. It was over. That was the moment everything changed. The moment I realized my grandmother, even in death, had been looking out for me. The small worn piece of paper Mr. Davies held in his hand was more powerful than my parents' entire fortune. It was a testament to her love, her wisdom, and her understanding of human nature. Jennifer, who had been sitting beside me in stunned silence, finally found her voice. "Claire, you have to do something," she said. "You have to get that will." Mr. Davies just smiled. He explained that a copy of the handwritten will was in the safe along with the original. "She knew that it would be a legal battle," he said. "She knew that your parents would fight this. So she made sure that every word was legally binding and that there was a witness to her signature." My heart felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. My grandmother had thought of everything. We left Mr. Davies's office and drove to my grandmother's house. I felt a knot of dread in my stomach. The house was now owned by my parents, and I knew that going there was a risk. But Mr. Davies insisted that we needed to get the original handwritten will. He said that while the copy was legally sound, the original would be a powerful piece of evidence in court. We pulled up to the house and I saw my father's new sports car parked in the driveway. A massive, flashy thing that seemed to mock the quiet, simple home it was parked in front of. We walked up to the front door and I felt a wave of anxiety. What if they were home? What if they saw us? We tried the door and to my surprise it was unlocked. We walked inside and my heart sank. The house was no longer my grandmother's home. It was a showroom. The old, worn furniture was gone, replaced by modern, minimalist pieces. The walls, which had been covered in family photos, were now bare. It was as if my parents had erased every trace of my grandmother. My stomach churned. It was more painful than seeing them live in luxury. This was a desecration. We went straight to the bedroom. My grandmother's room. It too had been gutted. My parents had already started to move things out, leaving a few empty boxes on the floor. I walked to the old dresser, the one that had been in her family for generations. My grandmother had always kept a small black notebook in the top drawer. I opened the drawer, my hands shaking. The notebook was still there. I opened it to the very last page, and there it was. The will, the handwritten additions, the signatures. I closed the notebook and held it to my chest, a powerful sense of relief washing over me. Suddenly I heard a car pull up in the driveway. It was my parents. Their laughter echoed through the quiet house, a loud, vulgar sound that felt completely out of place. I quickly hid the notebook in my bag. I could hear my mother, Linda, talking about how they were going to turn the house into a vacation rental, a source of passive income. I felt a wave of rage so powerful, it almost knocked me over. I was about to walk out and confront them when my dad, Mark, walked into the room. He stopped dead in his tracks when he saw me. His face, which had been flushed with excitement, went pale. "Claire," he stammered, "what are you doing here?" My mother, Linda, walked into the room, and her eyes went wide with shock. "What is going on?" she said. "Why is she here?" I just stood there, a small knowing smile on my face. "I'm just getting a few things I left behind," I said. They both looked at me with a mixture of suspicion and fear. They knew something was wrong. They just didn't know what. "You don't need to worry about me anymore," I said. My voice was calm and steady, completely devoid of the hurt I had felt just a few weeks ago. They just stood there silent, watching me. I walked past them, the small black notebook, a heavy weight in my bag. A weight that felt like the beginning of a new chapter. I had won. I had not only won the money, I had won back my self-worth. I had won back my life. It was over. It was over. The legal battle was done, the verdict was in, and my parents had lost. I walked out of that courtroom a different person, with a sense of freedom that I had never known. The next few months were a blur of paperwork and meetings with Mr. Davies. He helped me get control of the trust, and I began the process of building my life back, but this time on my own terms. I didn't want the life they had coveted. I wanted the life I had always dreamed of. I began by opening a small office in downtown Charlotte, just a few blocks from where I used to work. I bought a new desk, a few chairs, and a comfortable rug. My first hire was Jennifer. She had been my rock through it all, and I knew I could trust her completely. We worked tirelessly building the business from the ground up. I put all my knowledge and passion for financial planning and organization into it. We named it Eleanor's Legacy, a way of honoring the woman who had made it all possible. Our first few clients were small, but they were a start. We worked with young families and single women, helping them build their financial futures, just as I had always dreamed of doing. It was a fulfilling job, and I loved every minute of it. I found a sense of purpose that had been missing from my life for years. I was no longer a victim. I was a survivor, a businesswoman, a success. Meanwhile, I watched from afar as my parents' world began to crumble. The investigation into their fraudulent activities led to a series of legal battles, and their extravagant spending continued unabated. They were still living in their Miami mansion, still throwing lavish parties, still parading their new wealth in front of the world. But now, it was all a house of cards. They were quickly running out of money, and the legal fees were piling up. A year passed. My business was thriving, my life was full, and I had found a quiet peace. The phone call came on a Tuesday afternoon. It was an unknown number, and for a second I thought about not answering it. But a strange impulse made me pick up. "Hello," I said. There was a long pause, and then I heard a voice so filled with desperation that I barely recognized it. It was my father, Mark. "Claire," he stammered. "Is that you?" I just stood there silent. The last time I had seen him, he was leaving the courtroom, his face a mask of shame and fury. "Claire, please don't hang up," he said. His voice cracked, and I could hear the desperation in his tone. I need to talk to you. I'm sorry." The apology felt hollow, empty. "What do you want, Dad?" I said. The word felt strange on my tongue. I'm a mess," he said. "Your mother left. She took everything. The house, the cars, all of it. I'm broke. I lost everything." My heart felt a pang of something, not sympathy, but something close to it. It was a quiet acknowledgement that karma was real. "I have nowhere to go, Claire," he said. "I'm living in a motel. I have nothing." He was crying now, a deep guttural sob that I had never heard before. I just listened. All those years I had given up for them, all the money I had, lent them all the pain they had caused me. It was all coming back to them now. He began to talk about how he and Linda had been living in a dream world, a world of endless parties and lavish spending. He said that my mother, Linda, had been living a lie, and that when the money ran out, she had left. He said that he was alone, and that he had nothing. I felt a strange sense of closure. My father had lost everything not because of me, but because of his own greed. "I never knew," he said, his voice full of regret. "I never knew that your grandmother was so wise. I never knew that she had seen right through us." It was the most honest thing he had ever said to me. I just listened in silence, and when he was done, I said, "Dad, I forgive you. But I can't help you." There was a long silence, and then he hung up the phone. I just stood there holding my phone, a single tear rolling down my cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of peace. That phone call, it was the final closing of a door that had been left ajar for too long. His voice, once so full of arrogance and entitlement, was now broken, filled with the echo of his own ruin. I listened to him confess his misery, his loss, and the sudden brutal reality of his situation. I didn't feel happiness or revenge. I felt a deep, profound sense of peace. The tears that rolled down my cheeks weren't for him, they were for me. A tear of peace, a quiet acknowledgement that I had won not in a courtroom but in my soul. I had won back my life. It was over. It has been a year since that day, a year filled with purpose and a peace I never thought possible. My business, Eleanor's Legacy, is thriving. What began as a small, humble office with just Jennifer and me has now grown into a flourishing firm with 5 dedicated employees. We've moved into a bigger office in downtown Charlotte, a beautiful space with floor-to-ceiling windows that look out over the city. Every morning as the sun rises, I am filled with a sense of gratitude, not just for the success, but for the opportunity. I am no longer a victim. I am a survivor, an entrepreneur, and a leader. My relationship with Jennifer has deepened into something more than just friendship. She is the family I chose, the person who stood by me when my own blood turned their backs. We are a team, a partnership built on trust and mutual respect. She is the first one I go to for advice, the first one I celebrate with, and the first one I lean on when things get tough. I realize now that a family is not defined by blood, but by the love and loyalty we choose to give. I am a richer woman for having her in my life. I have come to realize that my grandmother's gift to me was not the money. The money was just a tool, a means to an end. Her real gift was the opportunity to rebuild my life on my own terms. She knew that I was a strong, capable woman. She knew that I would not let the money change me. She knew that I would use it to build something meaningful, something that would honor her legacy. I have started a foundation in her name. A foundation that helps young women who are in financial trouble, who are in need of a fresh start. It's my way of paying it forward, of honoring the woman who gave me everything. The betrayal that once defined my story has become merely a chapter in a much larger narrative of growth and self-discovery. It was a painful chapter, a heartbreaking one, but it taught me things I never would have learned otherwise. It taught me the true meaning of family. It taught me the true meaning of strength. It taught me that sometimes losing everything you thought you wanted can lead you to what you truly deserve. I look at my life now and I feel a quiet sense of triumph. I am not a victim. I am a woman who was pushed to her breaking point and came out on the other side stronger, wiser, and more authentic. I have discovered that my capacity to create meaning from misfortune is more powerful than any amount of money. The last time I saw my parents, they were leaving the courtroom, their faces a mask of shame and fury. They lost everything not because of me, but because of their own endless, insatiable greed. The very money they had craved and fought for was the one thing that was taken away from them. Their life of luxury was built on a foundation of lies, and like all lies, it eventually crumbled. They went from being millionaires to being broke, homeless, and alone. I feel a quiet satisfaction in that, a sense of justice being served, a feeling that karma is a very real thing. They were left with nothing, and I was left with a life full of purpose, love, and fulfillment. The story I've told you is a painful one, but it is a story of hope and resilience. It is a story about a woman who was betrayed by the people she loved most, and who found a way to heal and to thrive. I hope that by sharing my story, I can inspire you to find your own strength, to find your own way to heal, and to live a life that you are proud of. If this story has resonated with you, I would love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever been pushed to your breaking point only to discover a strength you never knew you had? Have you ever had to choose between your family and your sanity? Share your story in the comments below. And if this video has inspired you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories about finding unexpected strength in difficult situations. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that sometimes losing what you thought you wanted can lead you to what you truly deserve.